what perception you see about open source. For instance, sometimes I hit up Google search, like open source versus security, kind of really basic, stupid search, just to see what headlines it drops at me. And I think within the first three, or maybe it's the first two, open source is the most secure, software option you can get, or the least secure. And that's all headlines. And if you don't know better, if you never really had experience with open source other than being a user who may just be an unconscious user, like how would someone be able to tell which headline is actually closer to reality? In your experience, what is the perception when you talk to people about open source? Like, which headline are they gravitating towards, if either of those?
I don't know that I've seen a consensus in responses there. It's really widespread, as are the headlines. Folks who've been around open source a long time might be familiar with the phrase, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. It's a sort of a claim why open source is better. And the recent XZ utils backdoor, a pretty good example of that. It's a good thing that someone had eyes on it who wasn't even part of the project and found it. And then more people started looking into it and figuring out the root cause and how to remove it. The inverse is also true. And I think this is a maxim that I've been saying for a few years now. Given a few of the right eyes, all software contains bugs. Even before Copilot and ChatGPT began writing code, we had a problem where there was more software being written than in open source than people to review it. So lots and lots of projects have just one maintainer or two maintainers. And the maxim that all like open source is more secure because more people review it, that is still true of some projects. The big ones, the established ones, Debian, Linux kernel, two of my favorite examples. I've worked with both those groups for years. But people who have not interacted or been part of those larger open source communities, they may have only seen little, small groups of open source or things on GitHub or things on NPM. It's open source because it's published, not because there's a process or a community. I think that's where the perception gap between these two groups comes from. Those who've been part of a big community and those who have maybe worked on a forge and seen open source on Reddit, but not participated in the community.
Yeah, I think you just picked two of the gold standards when it comes to process and communities that are extremely savvy, technically competent, and have the processes in place over decades at this point in setting up how best to do that. So yeah, I mean, to you, Ildiko, I mean, I think your both Google searches are right. And I think that's what we just heard from Aeva as well, right? Depending on the software, it is the most secure, and it can be actually very insecure because there aren't any eyes on it. So, and that goes back to, open source is a license type. Collaborative development is a set of methodologies and processes, and those are two very different things. And they're often conflated, right? Open source is just one general thing to a lot of people. And unless you're part of those ecosystems and understand the difference, it's easy to make that conflation.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, even if it's not just one maintainer, like there are more and more communities which are driven by one vendor company, for instance, or being open core projects where there's an enterprise version that is a commercial version, and the core of that enterprise version is what is being developed kind of in an open environment, but not fully open. Like some contributions are welcome, other contributions are not welcome. And I think the lines get even blurrier with these different scenarios for someone who doesn't have prior open source experience, especially a good open source experience within a diverse community where they really see what the real value is behind not just the license type, but the open collaborative development of software that is a common dependency. Like all the infrastructure software pieces are prime examples to that. So I definitely do see and understand how it can be really hard to understand what's behind the term open source and be able to also trust it at the same time, like why it actually works and why it could be secure. And it also should be, but I think there must be people out there who can't even comprehend that it could be at least as secure, if not more secure than a commercial solution that is worked on by one company who may or may not skips half of the functional tests because there's a deadline.